I was a teenage zombie. My body was slowly being taken over by forces beyond my control. My mouth would emit weird, unexpected honking sounds when I spoke. My skin became cratered as the moon. Patches of hair sprouted from unlikely places. But the worst part of this invasion was the way it made me feel. I was a lonely teenage zombie. You would not have wanted to know me back then, especially if you were one of those most mysterious of creatures, a girl. Unable to understand my affliction, I resolved to protect myself as best I could. I donned the mask of sarcasm. I became the sneering one, the hypocrite who disguised his jealousy of all things good and sweet with sour mockery. And my mockery was never so acidic as when I heard my younger sister Karen play her Beatles albums. The Beatles were, after all, a girl band. No manly 14-year-old zombie would be caught dead listening to those cute, huggable visitors from another planet. Neither Karen nor anyone in my family suspected the truth. When everyone was asleep, I would steal into the living room and lie on the floor, my head stuck between the removable twin speakers of my parents' stereo, and I would listen surreptitiously at barely audible levels to Meet the Beatles, Beatles 65, and especially the soundtrack to A Hard Day's Night. Though I couldn't admit it to Karen, let alone myself, I was in love with the Beatles too. A few years ago, on a sultry July afternoon, I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from abdominal surgery, watching numbly as tendrils of depression began to creep up the legs of that sodden, unfriendly bed. At lunchtime that day, I received not the greasy hamburger and fries my IV-fed body craved, but something infinitely tastier. My daughter Annie's laptop. It was there and then that I reconnected with my closeted teenage past. Without a moment's hesitation, I Googled up YouTube and punched in the words, Beatles, Hard Day's Night. A blank screen gave way to that bizarre, unforgettable opening chord. Splang! The chord that signaled the beginning of the running, jumping, standing still opening credits of Richard Lester's great movie. A thrill ran through my battered body as I watched those grinning young men run from mobs of screaming, delirious girls. I must have played that clip a dozen times that day. Every time I did, my hospital cell melted away, replaced by that remembered living room floor where my long ago skinny, secretive self again lay enraptured. When I snapped the laptop closed that evening, I felt newly alive, nourished for the first time since my surgery. There I was, nearly half a century later, tears in my eyes, resembling no one in the movie more than Paul's grandfather, knowing as much as it's possible for a clean old man to know how thrilling it must have been to have been a lovesick teenage girl back then, screaming, galloping after her favorite Beatle, sobbing at the pure, mysterious pleasure of a race she knew she could never win, but running it just the same. It's a passion that should never have been sneered at, but treasured for the tender moment it was. That song, that film clip, those screaming girls were as inspiring to me as any of the great freedom songs of the civil rights era. I felt utterly refreshed, ready for anything, ready to throw off my thin blanket, rip out the IV line, and dash madly down the dismal hallway outside my door, down to the steamy city streets below, running like those girls, running away from the misery and self-pity that had nearly taken me over. It had been a hard day's night, yeah, but I'd get out of that damned hospital no matter what. I'd get home, and I would feel all right.